what do you say?
What say
You're
you?
not speaking out against charismatics. Your very narrow focus is on what?
So Doug Givett, my co-author, he's a professor at Talbot School of Theology and at Biola University. And we wrote 2 books together, as you shared. And yes, we're very clear that we are not critiquing classical Pentecostalism or historic charismatic teachings. What we critique is the NAR teaching. This is the core NAR teaching, New Apostolic Reformation teaching, that present-day apostles and prophets must hold offices, governing offices in the church. These are formal offices, and like a pastor or an elder, but that these are even viewed as higher offices, and pastors and elders actually should come under the authority of the apostles and prophets. And the reason is apostles and prophets, according to NAR leaders, are the only 2 offices that have been authorized by God to bring new revelation to the church. So they would say that the church has been operating for almost 2,000 years with missing the two of the fingers, 2 of the offices that in Ephesians 4:11 says that there are apostles, prophets, evangelists, pastors, and teachers. And according to the NAR understanding of that passage, these are 5 governing offices that should continue through all generations of the church, but the church, for the most part, has not acknowledged the prophets and apostles, and so they must come back. And so that since these are the only 2 offices authorized to give new revelation to the church, and this revelation is seen as strategies that the church must have in order to complete the Great Commission, which has been redefined in the NAR movement as a commission to take dominion or socio-political control of America, of all the nations of the earth, and set up God's kingdom prior to Christ's return. And so the Great Commission has been redefined as a dominion mandate as well. And so they're giving these new strategies that will enable all of their followers to become miracle workers and work even greater miracles than Jesus did. And then they can work these miracles that will result in establishing God's kingdom on earth.
Do you ever get the impression when they talk about dominion that what they're really talking about is dominion over our bank accounts? That they
well,
would like
and the prosperity gospel is subsumed. It is part of the teaching in NAR, because the teaching is that the church will need the great wealth to set up God's kingdom, and so the wealth of the wicked needs to be transferred to the righteous, the people, the apostles in this movement, so that they'll have the resources that are needed to set up God's kingdom on earth. So that's a well-known prophecy in this movement called the Great End-Time Transfer of Wealth. That's one of the new revelations that the prophets in this movement claim they've received.
GETOW, get out.
You know what? You raise an interesting issue, unrelated to this, but we have another group vying to transfer all of the wealth as well. The globalists are preparing either late this year or early next year for a financial global reset. And that will then enable them to kind of transfer all of the wealth to where they feel it should go to set up their kingdom. So you really do have 2 kingdoms vying for preeminence today, the NAR and the globalist.
So
and the prophets have actually used, some of the NAR prophets have used that language as well. They've referred to it as the Great Reset, which I found interesting, the end time transfer of wealth. And they actually believe that the events that have been occurring this year with COVID and everything, that all the chaos this year will help lead to the Great Reset.
Okay. Now, I have a question for you before we kind of move on to the next thing. Alike says that we are a small church in Mexico. Could Mrs. Privic, we can say that, right? Mrs., you're okay with that?
That's totally fine.
Give advice on something we could add to our creed to differentiate ourselves from the NAR heresy. That's a great question.
It is a great question. And I would like to say that Doug and I have actually developed a position paper. There was a church that was trying to develop a position paper to adopt because this church had been divided by the NAR, and new pastor came in and said, we need to adopt a position paper to make sure this doesn't happen again, that these NAR teachings don't come into our church again and cause this division again. And so they reached out to us, and we drafted a position paper that other churches have adopted as well. And it's available on my website at hollypivic.com, a position paper. But so a like could go there and see that whole position paper if that is put in the search box, position paper. But one thing that could be added, a church could adopt as a statement to the effect of, we deny that there are present day governing offices of apostle and prophet. That would be something that could be added to, the beliefs of the church. They could also mention specific practices that they reject that have come out of these strategies that are revealed by the new apostles and prophets. So, for example, they could say, we reject teachings about a great end-time transfer of wealth, or about the 7 mountain mandate, or about spiritual mapping and strategic level spiritual warfare. And we reject the teaching that the spiritual gifts can be activated in all individuals who desire them. In other words, that we reject the belief that anybody can learn to prophesy or work miracles or learn to heal people by taking part in prophetic activation exercises. And these kind of things could be also added to the statement.
So how would you go about answering someone? I mean, I can think of things I would say, but when you held up the three fingers saying, yeah,
I know, I was trying to
okay. Well, okay. So how would you answer them? They're accusing the historic Christian church. It's really an accusation. I would say it's also an indictment. They're saying, you guys have deliberately shut down, or maybe mistakenly shut down, but incorrectly shut down 2 of the biggest offices of the church, apostles and prophets. Mm-hmm. So how do we go about, how would you answer them?
Well, I would say that they would need to show from Scripture that these offices, well, first of all, I would say there were a variety of apostles in the New Testament. There were apostles, the 12 apostles of Christ and Paul. These apostles did govern the church, and they many of them wrote Scripture and contributed to the writing of Scripture. And then there were other apostles in the New Testament who were more like missionaries and church planners. And so if people are using the term apostles in that sense today, that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about people who would claim to be apostles who hold formal offices in church governance. Likewise, there are people who claim to be prophets today who claim that they just have a gift of prophecy, maybe speaking words of encouragement and edification in a local church setting or to individuals, but they wouldn't claim they have an office of governing the church. And so in the New Testament, you see this office of apostle, that the office of apostle that the 12 and Paul had. And then you don't see an office of prophet in the New Testament, though. I don't think anyone has been able to make a case that there was a governing office of prophet, even though there were prophets.
And I would hesitate to call what we see in the Old Testament an office.
Right.
I would tell you it's not established in the law of Moses.
Right, I agree. I don't think there was an office of prophet in the Old Testament either. The prophets acted as advisors to the king, but it doesn't seem that there was an office of prophet. And so for someone to say today that the offices of apostle and prophet and giving new revelation, that these are ongoing offices, they would need to demonstrate that from Scripture, which I believe they failed to do.
Maybe, but we're not there yet. I do want to say that some of the prophets or prophet wannabes get highly irritated and agitated when we start pointing out these inconsistencies and frankly, false prophecies. We have Kenneth Copeland, for example. He pronounced God's judgment against the coronavirus, declared that a cure would appear right now. and then he blew the virus away. It wasn't all that effective, and so as a prophet, he didn't really do well.
But what I would say also is, okay, you brought up an interesting distinction, potential. I don't know if everybody agrees, but let's just grant that there were governing apostles, the 12, and there were non-governing apostles. They were more like, I mean, if you look at the word apostle means like a delegate, someone who's sent to represent you. So there were 12 apostles of Christ plus Paul. They were all 13 were apostles of Christ. And then there were, you could say, apostles of apostles, people delegated by the apostles that they did not have the same status. So in other words, we're not talking about a governing office if it did continue, and we look at church history and we see no indication from the writings of the successors of the apostles that prophets in that sense, or apostles, continued. The other thing I would say is one of the things they're accusing us of is rejecting the office itself. Well, that we're not using it. Well, we have the Bible. That's where the office. We have the office is speaking to us every day through God's words. This book was written by apostles and prophets.
So here's my question then to Holly. Does Scripture take priority over someone claiming to be a prophet, or is Scripture subsumed under the prophet?
Here's the thing. Pretty much every leader in this movement will say that Scripture is the final authority, that their words can never contradict Scripture. The Scripture is even a higher authority than them. But the thing is there's what they say and then how it plays out in practice. And so when they're revealing new truths that they call new strategies that the church must have in order to set up God's kingdom on earth, that is to equate their words with Scripture, because they, even if they don't actually physically, append their words to a Bible, they're saying that their words are essential to the mission of the church for Christians receiving their words, and that the mission of the church cannot be completed without receiving their new strategies. And so it's in effect to put their words on a par with Scripture. And then moreover, there's a doctrine in this movement called Prophetic Illumination. And this is the belief that apostles and prophets receive new insights into understanding Scripture that no one has ever seen before, or at least new understandings of Scripture that maybe the first generation of Christians had and then has subsequently been lost through the centuries. And so the idea that an apostle or prophet is needed to reveal an understanding of Scripture that nobody else has seen before is also in effect to put their words above Scripture.
So as a practical measure, their words do go above Scripture, although they would verbally deny that.
Yes.
Okay. Oh, so that raises all sorts of other interesting.
Well, we've had people. There's a guy named John Robinson who was on the Mayflower. Now the Pilgrims were not. They don't easily fit into any category within Protestantism. I'm not really sure of all their beliefs, but one of the people who was on the Mayflower as a pilgrim to the U.S. to the colonies was a man named John Robinson, and he said, "I am verily persuaded the Lord hath more truth yet to break forth out of his holy word." So you have these kinds of sentiments were expressed many times over the past few hundred years, but I find it kind of dangerous. I can grant it on a theoretical level that there might have been something that every single Christian missed, but I find every time I've seen that happen, every time I've seen somebody present something that was never presented before, the results have never been good.
Yeah, I think that's generally true. Now, which raises a question to me, because Holly said something that all of a sudden my brain's going, wait a minute, where is that in Scripture? And that is essentially that is our task to Christianize the world in order for the Lord to return.
Yeah, that's kind of weird. Well, you can see how people might read.
Now, that's a question for Holly.
Yeah, okay. I'll let Holly answer it.
Right. What was your question exactly, Don?
Okay.
Sorry.
Well, the question is, because you're talking about the 7-month mandate so we can reclaim the world and so that Christ can return. So fundamentally, somewhere in the New Testament, they have a passage that says, your task, guys, is to go out and Christianize the world in order for me to be able to return.
One would hope they have a passage.
Well, they often point to passages in the Old Testament, which in my view and the view of many, apply to the millennium. And they would say that, this time of peace that you see on earth that's prophesied by the Old Testament prophets indicates that will they don't see that as belonging to the millennium. They see that as belonging to this time before Christ returns. And they would also say they would disagree maybe as to how much of God's kingdom can be set up on earth prior to Christ's return. But Bill Johnson, who's the chief apostle at Bethel Church in Redding, California, the most influential NAR church today in the world, probably, he would say that it's much more of God's kingdom can be set up prior to Christ's return than we've ever imagined before. And the leaders in this movement will really disparage Christians who are premillennial, who believe that the earth will grow darker and more wicked prior to Christ's return. They really disparage those who hold to a pre-trib view of the rapture. They call that escapism, that the idea that Christians will want to escape and flee the world rather than being part of the solution and fixing all the world's problems through the prophetic revelations they receive that will supposedly enable them to find solutions to all the world's problems, poverty, the climate change, whatever the world's problems are. They believe that the prophets will receive supernatural insights that will enable the church to solve those problems and set up God's kingdom on earth.
So when you say they disparage Christians who hold these views, am I detecting a streak of elitism in this movement?
Yes, definitely. Definitely there's elitism. So, and of course, they would probably deny that, but the idea in this movement, and many people who come out of this movement will say that they used to view Christians as kind of A-class Christians and B-class Christians, and the A-class Christians were the ones who followed the apostles and prophets, were up to date with all the new revelations, believed in, that they can learn to work miracles and become this miracle working army and really focused on signs and wonders in these things. And other Christians are really dead Christians who don't emphasize signs and wonders, who don't follow the apostles and prophets. They're kind of dead, I guess, carnal Christians that are really will sit on the sidelines in the end times because they won't have the strategies they need to set up God's kingdom.
We're going to be benched, in other words.
Right.
We're going to be.
Well, we have some prophecies from 2020, and we do want to comment on these because that's at least the title of what we're doing. For example, Rodney Howard Brown and his Word Faith, Laughing Revival, also involved with NAR, prophesied that he would personally cure coronavirus, just like the Zika virus, and that he would personally keep the former from coming to Florida. So how did that work out?
Yeah, there were a lot. So 2020 was an especially bad year for the NAR prophets.
Not a good year.
I would say it started back even before 2020. Around Christmas time, 2019 was when Bethel Church in Redding thought that through their declarations they could raise the little girl Olive, 2-year-old little girl who died unexpectedly. She was the daughter of one of the church's worship leaders. They tried to raise her from the dead for 6 days by speaking declarations that they thought their spoken words had the authority to bring her back from the dead. Of course, that failed, but national media followed that story very closely. And so that's kind of how they started off 2020. And then they went into 2020 and they didn't foresee COVID-19. You know, all the usual, every year the prophets release their words of the Lord for the new year, or many of them do. And they were all the typical prophecies that this will be the year that your wealth will increase. This will be the year that the great harvest of souls will begin to take place. This will be the year everything will go well for Christians.
Well, the Cubs win the World
So
Series.
none of them foresaw COVID-19. And then
so our wealth decreased because
right.
the stock. I mean, well, you can argue that the stock market came back, but most people have a lot less money now than they did at the beginning of 2020.
They also prophesied that Trump is a deliverer that would lead the nation to revival.
I wish these people wouldn't prophesy.
And so their prophecies about Donald Trump obviously seem to have failed. That many NAR prophets prophesied that Trump would be reelected, and multiple secular news outlets have followed this. And that's one bad thing that is the outcome of these false prophecies, is that atheists and people who are not Christian have been using these prophecies, these false prophecies, to mock all of Christians, to mock all of evangelicals. Yeah, and you can go to YouTube and find videos that they've created making fun of these prophets with millions of views. And so this is making it harder for other Christians, for those of us, to share the gospel going forward. And so it's a really sad thing that is the outcome of these prophecies.